For Pokemon, 2012 was a pretty busy year. After all, meanwhile gearing up to release an all-new mainline game for the 3DS in the coming year, they'd also keep things fresh by giving Pokemon Black and White a direct sequel. There's no doubt that even in the DS's twilight years, Game Freak kept the fans more than satiated, and behind all that, unbeknownst to many, one of Pokemon's most unique spin-offs would quietly release, overshadowed by the mainline game, but arguably just as good. Hello everyone, this is the RPG Monger, and today let's talk about Pokemon Conquest. Coming out a bit before Black and White 2, Pokemon Conquest is without a doubt one of the franchise's more unique entries, as it's actually a crossover with one of the oldest grand strategy RPGs around, Nobunaga's Ambition. It may not be very well known in the West, but this series is pretty prolific in the genre, bringing in a whole new depth never before seen in games like it. As the title implies, most games in the series take place in feudal Japan, following the titular Nobunaga or other feudal warlords depending on who the player selects. Then after that, the game gives you the simple goal of uniting all of Japan, defending the locations you already control, and strategically taking over the territories controlled by others. Seeing that, when thinking of a franchise that make for a good crossover, Pokemon is probably the very last thing that come to mind, but surprisingly, they made it work a little too well. Rather than focusing on the unification of Japan, Conquest would focus on the unification of the Ransei region. The first campaign mostly consisting of you going around conquering the 17 kingdoms of the region. And that's all well and good, but it's the gameplay of Conquest that really caught my eye. Meshing with the aspects of the mainline Pokemon games pretty well, the Pokemon in Conquest work just like how they do in the core series, utilizing the type system. However, when it comes to a Pokemon's moves, things are much different. Each Pokemon only receiving one move to use, the only way to change that being evolution if the Pokemon can evolve. Now that sounds pretty restrictive, sure, but with the amount of usable Pokemon in this game, each with moves that work differently, that's not at all the case. Plus, on top of that, all Pokemon have abilities, some working how they do normally, and others specially tailored for Conquest. Already, that's more than enough to craft a solid strategy game with a good amount of variety, but aside from the Pokemon, there's also the warriors and warlords who join them in battle. All of them named after real historical figures. Once every battle, if the situation demands it, you can utilize a special skill each warrior or warlord has, whether it be something to help out like restoring HP or strengthening attack to deal a decisive blow. And when it comes to both warriors and their Pokemon, mindlessly training them won't cut it, since with each different warrior, they have a set preference of the type of Pokemon they do best with, certain Pokemon within those requirements having the chance to form a perfect link with their warriors, allowing them to become far stronger than if they were trained by someone else. When it comes to the actual warlords, they're especially unique, as alongside story significance and unique designs, once they reach a certain point with their perfect link, they too will evolve in a sense, gaining a design similar to their Perfect Link Pokemon and receiving an all-new unique skill, making them far more valuable than the typical warrior. Personally, I'd say my favorite is Hideyoshi, otherwise known as the Monkey Man. The thing is, not every warrior starts out with the Pokemon they can form a perfect link with, meaning you have to actively search for and catch that Pokemon. Except rather than going the Pokeball route, Conquest features a little timing-based minigame to catch Pokemon. Whether you've played a tactical RPG or not, Conquest is a game you can pick up easily, the amount of content in the game being a bit astounding once you realize how much there really is. But we'll get to that soon. Outside of battles, there's a decent amount of stuff to handle as well, the game letting you develop your kingdoms by investing in them, and getting some extra money by literally sending your Pokemon and warriors to the mines. If that right there doesn't sell you, I don't know what will. Though so you don't have to tell all your warriors what to do each month, you can simply have specific kingdoms set on one goal, whether it be training warriors, searching for more warriors, or developing said kingdoms. And next to all that, there's also random events that can happen in each campaign, ranging from weather making certain Pokemon stronger to your warriors themselves getting sick. Without a doubt, Conquest makes sure you stay busy. So with the base gameplay covered, let's talk about Conquest's story, something that kind of surprised me towards the end. I mean, I guess it is kind of obvious when you look at the actual region itself, but let's just ignore that for now. At the start, the Ransei region is set up as a unique society of 17 different kingdoms, all vying to conquer each other to take total control over the region. Since as told by Ransei's legend, once someone unites all the kingdoms of the region, the very being who created it will return. And amongst all the warlords of the region, none are closer to realizing that legend than Nobunaga, having already conquered a sizable portion of Ransei. But on the opposite side of the region from that, in the beginning, our protagonist starts out in the small kingdom of Aurora, managing to take over the 3 kingdoms that surround it after Aurora was attacked by one of them. Alongside having a pretty versatile Eevee that you can evolve later, throughout the story, you'll meet a variety of warlords, each with their own unique Pokemon and personalities. From the start, there's Oichi, a warlord who stays with you throughout the entire story, motivating the protagonist to continue expanding Aurora's dominion. Though that desire doesn't come out of nowhere, as revealed later on, Oichi is actually Nobunaga's little sister, much like her historical counterpart. You see, before the events of Conquest's main story, Oichi left her home kingdom of Dragnor in fear of Nobunaga's intentions, believing his conquests would spell the demise of Ransei. So then, allied with a variety of warlords you already bested in battle, the protagonist snatches up even more kingdoms before finally arriving at Dragnor, the imposing Nobunaga more than ready to fend off the protagonist's now massive army. And despite Nobunaga having the legendary Pokemon Zekrom, the protagonist accomplishes their goal, defeating him and uniting all of Ransei. But wait, remember that legend I touched on earlier? Well, now that Ransei is united, it's time to see if there was any truth behind it. And as several beams of light emerge out of every kingdom, all converging at a tower in Dragnor, it seems the legend was pretty spot on. So then, after climbing up the tower, the protagonist is faced with none other than Arceus, which, if I can pause things for a moment, is really kind of incredible. I mean, when you think about it, even in the mainline games, Arceus never actually made a big official appearance, what with the planned event for the Pokemon being cancelled. Out of all the Pokemon out there, for something that is essentially the equivalent of God for Pokemon, it's criminal how Game Freak just tossed Arceus away to minor appearances in spin-offs and 2 subpar movies. Though then, along comes Pokemon Conquest, not only giving Arceus pretty important plot relevance, but even structuring the finale of the game around it. For me, it was seriously exciting, as when you face Arceus, the literal god wants to link with you, and after you pull off that incredible feat, out of nowhere, Nobunaga shows up yet again, this time with a shiny Rayquaza at his side. Like, you know the devs that came from Nobunaga's ambition just wanted to give him the coolest Pokemon they could come up with. And as he reveals, it was his plan for you to link up with Arceus all along, as now, with Arceus in clear sight, Nobunaga aims to strike the god down himself, the actual final battle starting immediately. Honestly, it's been a while since I've seen anything related to Pokemon have this strong of a finale, and this game definitely delivers. Since while your allies do exist, the main feature of this fight is just demolishing Nobunaga with the god powers of Arceus. So after curb stomping Nobunaga into the ground, he reveals that his intentions actually weren't all that malicious. You see, with how prolific the legend of Arceus had become in Ransei, over time the region had fallen into a site for constant battles between warriors, each one hoping to obtain the power of Arceus for themselves, neglecting their Pokemon and using them as mere tools in the process. In fact, things had become so bad that many had become incapable of loving their Pokemon. Seeing that, Nobunaga wished to save his homeland from the never-ending years of battle, attempting to unite the region to both put a stop to all the fighting and demolish the legend's influence. However, seeing how the protagonist accomplished Nobunaga's goal and never stopped caring for their Pokemon, it showed him that his way wasn't the only path to peace. So with all the fighting concluding and Arceus promising to return once the protagonist had grown sufficiently, peace finally washed over Ransei, all the warlords agreeing on region-wide laws protecting the Pokemon for good. All in all, it's a pretty great way to end the game, right? Well, if you think that's the end, you're in for a world of hurt. That, my friend, was merely the tutorial. Yep, you heard me right. The first main campaign Pokemon Conquest sets you out on is merely a small fraction of what the full game has to offer, as after beating it, you unlock the stories, each one being an entirely new campaign focusing on a specific warlord. Of course, you only start with a few of them, but once you unlock them all, Pokemon Conquest has 37 stories in total, many being just as long as the main campaign you start out with. Seriously, in all the Pokemon games I've played, mainline and spin-offs, I've never seen a post-game this massive in the entire franchise. And just a tip from someone who went through practically all of them in a short span of time, it'd be for the better if you didn't do these all in one go. Don't get me wrong, these stories are all a blast, as it's basically just an excuse to play more Conquest. But after a while, the premises do begin to get a bit repetitive. Let me explain. Although each story focuses on a different warlord, developing their character and their relationships with other warlords, the actual content of the stories kind of falls into a couple categories. For many, it's something simple like conquering all of Ransei, but for others, some stories will limit the amount of Ransei accessible, or change the requirements for winning, like requiring you to obtain a certain amount of Pokemon or a certain amount of warriors. Then aside from those, there's a couple more unique ones, like the 2 stories for the rivals Kenshin and Shingen, where rather than conquering everything, you just have to win 5 battles and not lose 5. Plus, similar to that, there's also 2 stories where the victory requirement is just defeating Nobunaga's army before a certain date. Though honestly, that's about it. Aside from the premises, the other main difference between stories is where the game starts you off on the map, some locations being easy starting points and others requiring some serious thought to avoid losing. Not to mention, in the stories with a higher difficulty, if you leave even a single hole in your defenses, especially in the later game, Conquest will make you pay for it. I remember when I was going through Hideyoshi's story, I made the mistake of leaving a kingdom's defenses open after conquering another one, and immediately after ending my turn, another kingdom went ahead and conquered that one, leading to a long back and forth battle as I tried to both bolster my defenses and keep my kingdoms from being taken over. The good thing is, while you do have to start out weak at the beginning of every story, any Pokemon evolutions or Warlord transformations carry over from story to story, making any Warlords you'd gotten perfect links with in the past very valuable when you're looking for allies in each story. But enough on the gameplay aspects of stories, what about their plots? Well, while many are similar to each other just like the stories themselves, getting dialogue from all these colorful characters definitely makes it worth it. Of note, one story that does have a bit more plot relevance is Nobunaga's, where you get to see how Nobunaga started his conquest. Though then, once you've completed all the main Warlord stories, you'll unlock the final one, starring none other than the original protagonist themselves. In terms of payoff for doing so many stories, the final story of the game definitely makes itself worth it, since in the premise of this one, the protagonist actually teams up with Nobunaga from the start, the former rivals going against all the other warlords in their strongest forms. And if that wasn't already great enough, if you build your link with Eevee or whichever evolution you chose, Arceus will stay true to its word and return, this time permanently remaining at your side. So if you thought the original Conquest finale was great, now you really get to put Arceus to the test. If anything, I'd say the final story is more of a victory lap, as once you've finally beaten it, Nobunaga reminisces with you, motivating the protagonist to set his sights beyond Ransei and spread their message throughout the world. And this time, the game is actually over, the credits showing off the progress you'd made with all the warlords. In both concept and execution, Pokemon Conquest is a fantastic game that just has so much going for it. I haven't mentioned it up until now, but wow, is the music in this one something else. I don't know why these Pokemon spin-offs always have to go so hard with the tunes, but just listen to some of this. Pretty good, right? Well, the entire soundtrack is too. And while I'm gushing about the game, there's no neglecting the art, because Conquest is packed full of it. Fun fact, alongside Conquest being a crossover with Nobunaga's Ambition, it's also a crossover with another Koei Tecmo game, Samurai Warriors 3. As when it comes to the base designs of almost every character, they're pretty much directly taken from that aforementioned game, the perfect link forms being the only ones that are new. And interestingly enough, with the designs coming from Samurai Warriors 3, Conquest technically predates Hyrule Warriors as the first Nintendo game to feature aspects of the series, albeit not in such a capacity. Plus, that aside, one thing that kept Conquest playable for me, despite having to essentially do the same thing over and over with the stories, is just how varied each stage is in the game. While some do have elements that are used in others, like capturing banners and whatnot, practically every stage has a mechanic that's unique to it, definitely keeping things fresh throughout the game. I'll tell you right now, when you first hit that Psychic Kingdom, you'd better make sure your brain isn't smooth, because with the whole portal mechanic combined with banners, it can provide a serious challenge. Though on the flip side, I will say that the Steel stage can go burn in the fire. I honestly don't have a problem with anything else in the game, but the whole mechanic of Pokemon being picked up and placed down at a random point of the stage can become mildly annoying. Like, come on, did you really have to make it where there's a chance the entire match softlocks depending on where you're dropped? It actually happened to me when I challenged the kingdom for the first time, and man was that frustrating. frustrating. Other than that though, I don't have any complaints with Conquest. If anything, with how solid of a base the game is, they could expand a lot on it. Like just take the Pokemon. In total, Conquest only has 200 of them, with only a few legendaries. If they gave this game a sequel now, just adding half of the Pokemon we have now would suffice in giving the game a whole new depth. But unfortunately, if Pokemon continues its current trend, I highly doubt that would ever happen. Don't get me wrong, Pokemon Mystery Dungeons surviving the death of the 3DS is definitely a good sign for Pokemon spin-offs. However, even despite Conquest receiving stellar reviews across the board, sadly, the game was overshadowed by the mainline release a couple months later, barely selling 1 million copies as the DS began to fade away. Though who knows, since Conquest wasn't reliant on the touchscreen like Pokemon Ranger was, it does stand a better chance of being brought back. So anyways, in the end, Pokemon Conquest is another example of taking the best from multiple franchises and making something entirely brilliant out of it. If anything, all we can do is hope that one day, Conquest gets brought back into the spotlight it rightfully deserves. And now, ever since launching my Patreon recently, I'd like to give a heartfelt thank you to Anthony C. and everyone else who've decided to contribute. You guys are the best. If you want to help me continue keeping this channel alive and receive a special thank you among a lot of other cool stuff, do check out my Patreon, link in the description. So that being said, I'm the RPG Monger, and don't forget that each and every one of you are fantastic.